Margaret sat in her kitchen, staring at her phone screen with trembling hands. What she saw made her heart stop beating for what felt like forever. Her own son, David, was in her living room. But he wasn't watching TV or reading a book. He was going through her private papers like a thief in the night. And his wife Sarah was helping him. But wait, let me tell you how this all started, because if you're watching the story, you need to hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe because what happens next will shock you to your core. 3 days earlier, Margaret had called a repairman to fix her security camera. She was 68 years old and lived alone, well, not exactly alone anymore. David and Sarah had moved in 6 months ago, saying they wanted to take better care of her. How wrong she was about their real reasons. The camera had been broken for weeks. Margaret felt scared without it working. Living alone at her age made her feel unsafe, even with David and Sarah in the house. So she hired Tommy, a nice young man who fixed electronics, to come and repair it. But here's the thing, Margaret completely forgot to tell David and Sarah about the repair. She was so used to them making all the decisions in her house that it just slipped her mind. Thank God it did, because otherwise she would never have discovered the terrible truth. This morning started like any other Wednesday. David kissed her forehead and said he was going to a job interview. Sarah grabbed her purse and said she was going grocery shopping. Margaret waved goodbye from the kitchen window, thinking how lucky she was to have such caring family. But something made her want to test the camera. Maybe it was a feeling in her stomach, or maybe it was just curiosity. She remembered Tommy showing her the new app on her phone that let her see the whole house. "Let me just check if this thing is really working," she whispered to herself. Margaret tapped the camera app on her phone. The screen went black for a second, then suddenly there it was. A crystal clear picture of her living room. Her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. David and Sarah hadn't gone anywhere. They were right there in her living room, and her coffee table was covered with papers. Her papers. The important documents she kept locked in her bedroom desk. "Oh my God," Margaret gasped, almost dropping her phone. David was holding her folder of important papers, the same folder she always kept locked away. Sarah was next to him, looking at each paper carefully, holding them up to the window light. They moved like they had done this many times before. The camera even picked up their voices. Margaret turned up the volume with shaking fingers. "Where's the original house deed?" Sarah asked in a cold voice that made Margaret's skin crawl. "Robert told us he needs the original document to make the fake one look real." "Robert? Who was Robert?" Margaret had never heard David mention anyone named Robert. "It has to be here somewhere," David replied, sounding frustrated. "Mom keeps everything perfectly organized. She never loses anything." Margaret felt like she was watching a horror movie, except the monsters were the people she loved most in the world. Sarah moved closer to the window, holding up a piece of paper. "Look at this, David. It says the house is worth more than $500,000. Robert was right. It's worth all this trouble. $500,000. That was her house, the house she bought after working 30 years as a nurse. The house where she raised David all by herself after his father left when David was just 5 years old. The house she planned to leave him when she died, not while she was still alive. Once we get the deed in our names," Sarah continued with a mean smile, "we can sell this place and move her somewhere smaller. A tiny apartment will be enough for her last few years." Her last few years? They were talking about Margaret like she was already dead, like she was just something in their way. David walked toward her bedroom, and Margaret watched through another camera as he opened her drawers one by one. Her private drawers. Her personal space. "She must have a safety box somewhere," David said, coming back empty-handed. "She's always been so worried about keeping important papers safe." Worried? Worried? Margaret had worked her whole life for everything she owned. Of course, she was careful with important papers. Sarah was getting angry. "Robert gave us until Friday to get the original deed. Without it, he can't do his job. And without his help, we'll keep living on the crumbs your mother gives us." Crumbs? Sarah called the $700 Margaret gave them every month from her small pension crumbs. Money that Margaret could barely afford, money she gave them to help with their expenses. We'll have to pressure her more, David said, sitting in Margaret's favorite chair. We'll tell her these are medical insurance papers or something urgent she needs to sign. She's been so confused lately. She won't even read what she's signing.
Confused?
Yes. Sometimes Margaret took a little longer to remember names or dates. That was normal for someone her age. But David and Sarah had been making her feel stupid every time she asked questions about anything. What if she gets suspicious? Sarah asked. David shrugged like he didn't care at all. What's she going to do? Call the police on her own son? Besides, once we sign the papers with Robert, it'll be too late for her to stop us. Sarah smiled for the first time during their whole conversation. It was the most evil smile Margaret had ever seen. Perfect. Tomorrow we'll bring her Robert's fake documents and tell her they're for updating her will. She'll sign without asking any questions. Margaret watched as they put her papers away, but not the way she had organized them. They just threw them together carelessly, like they didn't even care if she noticed someone had been looking through them. Before leaving the room, David stopped and looked right at where the camera was. For a scary moment, Margaret thought he had discovered her secret. But he just stood there, thinking. I wish we didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Are you getting scared? Sarah asked, sounding annoyed. No, but... David sighed deeply. She's my mom, Sarah. The woman who raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs to give me everything I needed. For just one tiny moment, Margaret felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was still some good left in the boy who used to hug her when he had bad dreams. Maybe he would change his mind. But Sarah put her hand on his shoulder and said the words that killed Margaret's hope forever. David, honey, think about our future. Think about the kids we want to have. Do we want to depend on an old woman who gets more confused every day? This house is our chance to be independent. And just like that, Margaret watched her son's face get hard again. You're right, he said. It's time to think about us. They left the room, and Margaret sat there in her kitchen, staring at her phone like it was showing her the end of the world. But this wasn't a movie. This was her real life falling apart. For 35 years, she had raised David. She fed him, clothed him, loved him. She worked until she was exhausted to pay for his college. She gave up dating and remarrying to focus on being the best mother she could be. And now her greatest love had become her greatest betrayal. But David and Sarah didn't know something important. Something that would change. Everything. Margaret had recorded their entire conversation. She had proof of their criminal plan. And for the first time in months, SHE had the power. The war was just beginning. And they didn't even know they had already lost. The next morning, Margaret woke up feeling like she had lived through a nightmare. But when she checked her phone and saw the camera app, she knew it was all terribly real. She made breakfast like always, her hands shaking as she cracked the eggs. David came into the kitchen and kissed her cheek, just like he had done since he was a little boy. Morning, Mom, he said with that sweet smile she had loved for 35 years. I have another job interview today. Margaret looked at her son. This man she had raised with so much love, and felt sick to her stomach. She knew he was lying. She knew there was no job interview. She knew he was planning to steal her house. But she smiled back and said, That's wonderful, honey. I hope it goes well. Sarah came down wearing Margaret's favorite necklace, the one Margaret had gotten as a gift from the hospital when she retired. Sarah had just taken it without asking, like she owned everything in the house already. We might be out most of the day, Sarah said, not even looking at Margaret. Don't wait up for lunch. After they left, Margaret sat in her kitchen with her phone, watching them through the cameras. She felt like a detective in her own home, which was the saddest thing in the world. At exactly 10:30, David and Sarah came back. Margaret watched them go straight to her living room and pull out her papers again. This time, they had a laptop computer with them. Sarah opened the laptop and started typing. I'm calling Robert now, she said. We need to know exactly what he needs from us. Margaret leaned closer to her phone screen. She had to hear every word of this conversation. Sarah put the phone on speaker. A man's rough voice filled the room through the camera's microphone. Sarah, baby, you got my documents? The man said. This had to be Robert, the crooked lawyer. Not yet, Sarah replied. The old lady keeps everything locked up tight. We're still looking for the original deed. Listen carefully. Robert's voice got serious. I can't make fake papers without seeing the real ones first. The signatures have to match exactly, or the people at the government office will get suspicious. Margaret's heart pounded. They were talking about forging her signature. That was a serious crime. How much time do we have? David asked, leaning toward the phone. My guy at the property office works the Friday afternoon shift, Robert explained. That's our best chance to get your fake deed registered without too many questions. But I need the original by Thursday morning to make the copy look perfect. Thursday morning. That was tomorrow. And the money? Sarah asked. $25,000, like we agreed. Half now, half when the house is officially yours. $25,000. That was almost half of Margaret's entire life savings. Once the house is in our names, how fast can we sell it? David wanted to know. Robert laughed, a mean, ugly laugh. With a house worth $500,000? 2 weeks, maybe less. I know investors who buy houses with cash, no questions asked. You'll walk away with at least $400,000 after my fees. $400,000. They were planning to steal Margaret's home and make almost $500,000 from it. What about the old woman? Sarah asked. What if she figures out what we did? By the time she realizes what happened, the house will be sold and you'll be long gone, Robert said. Even if she calls the police, it'll be her word against official government documents. Who do you think they'll believe? Margaret felt tears running down her face. They had thought of everything. They had planned to leave her with nothing, no home, no money, no family. There's just one problem, David said quietly. I think my mom is getting suspicious. Yesterday, I caught her looking at me strangely. So what? Sarah snapped. David, your mother is 68 years old. She spends most of her day watching TV and talking to herself. She's not going to figure out anything. But what if? What if nothing? Sarah's voice got loud and angry. David, I'm tired of you being scared of your mommy. She's not some super detective. She's an old woman who can't even remember where she put her reading glasses. That wasn't true. Margaret always knew where her glasses were. Sarah's right. Robert's voice came through the phone again. Old people see what they want to see. Just keep acting normal. Bring me that deed tomorrow, and by next week you'll be rich. The phone call ended, and Sarah slammed the laptop shut. David sat on Margaret's couch, putting his head in his hands. I still don't feel good about this, he said. Sarah sat next to him and rubbed his back. Baby, listen to me. Your mother worked her whole life, right? She's tired. She wants to rest. We're actually doing her a favor by moving her somewhere smaller where she doesn't have to worry about this big house anymore. A favor? Stealing her house was a favor? And think about it, Sarah continued. She's going to leave you the house anyway when she dies, right? We're just getting it a little early. It's like an early inheritance. Early inheritance. That's what Sarah called robbery. Plus, Sarah added with that evil smile again, with the money from selling this place, we can put her in a really nice nursing home. She'll have people to take care of her, activities to do, friends her own age. She'll be happier there than rattling around in this big empty house. Margaret wanted to scream. She didn't want to go to a nursing home. This was her house. These were her things. This was her life. David looked up at Sarah. You really think she'll be happier? Of course. Sarah lied smoothly. And we'll visit her every week. Maybe even twice a week if we're not too busy. If they're not too busy? With Margaret's own money, they would be too busy to visit the woman who gave them everything? Okay, David said, standing up. Let's do it. Let's find that deed today. They spent the next 2 hours going through every drawer, every closet, every corner of Margaret's house. Margaret watched them through different cameras, feeling violated and angry. They were touching her personal things, reading her private letters, looking through her photo albums like they owned everything. Finally, Sarah found what they were looking for. In Margaret's bedroom closet, inside an old shoebox, was a folder marked House Papers. Found it, Sarah yelled, holding up the deed like it was a trophy. David came running. They both stared at the document like it was made of gold. "This is it," David whispered. "This piece of paper is our ticket to freedom." Freedom from what? From taking care of the mother who had sacrificed everything for him? Sarah took pictures of the deed with her phone. "I'm sending these to Robert right now. Tomorrow morning, we take him the original, and by Friday afternoon, this house belongs to us." They put the deed back in the shoebox, but Margaret could tell they had memorized exactly where it was. Tomorrow, they would come back for it. That evening, David and Sarah acted completely normal. They helped Margaret cook dinner. They watched TV with her. David even massaged her shoulders when she said they were sore. "You're such a good son," Margaret said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "I love you, Mom," David replied, kissing the top of her head. "I'll always take care of you." Lies. All lies. After they went to bed, Margaret sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea, thinking about everything she had heard. These people, her own son and his wife, were planning to steal her house, forge her signature, and abandon her in a nursing home. But they had made one big mistake. They thought Margaret was just a confused old woman who wouldn't fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Margaret opened her phone and started making a list of everything she had recorded. Every conversation, every plan, every crime they were planning to commit. Tomorrow, they would come for her house deed. But Margaret would be ready for them. The sweet old mother they thought they knew was about to become their worst nightmare. And the best part? They had no idea what was coming. Hey, everyone. Are you enjoying this incredible story so far? If Margaret's courage is inspiring you, smash that like button right now. And don't forget to subscribe because this story gets even more intense in the next section. I'm curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment and let me know what country or city you're in. Are there people like David and Sarah in your area too? Let's build a community of people who believe that families should protect each other, not betray each other. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, maybe someone who has elderly parents or grandparents. They need to know that stories like Margaret's happen in real life, and we all need to watch out for each other. Now, let's see what happens when Margaret starts planning her revenge. Margaret had never been an actress, but over the next 3 days, she gave the performance of her lifetime. Every morning, she woke up and put on her loving mother mask. She made David's favorite pancakes. She asked Sarah about her plans for the day. She smiled when David kissed her forehead goodbye. She waved from the window when they left. But the moment they were gone, Margaret became someone completely different. She became a detective in her own home. The camera app on her phone became her best friend. She could watch every room, hear every conversation, and record everything they said. Technology had become her secret weapon against the people trying to destroy her life. On Thursday morning, the day they planned to take her deed to Robert, Margaret watched them through her phone while pretending to read a magazine in the kitchen. Sarah was getting dressed in Margaret's bedroom, wearing Margaret's jewelry and using Margaret's expensive perfume. She acted like she already owned everything in the house. "Today's the big day," Sarah said to David, putting on Margaret's pearl earrings. "Are you ready to become a homeowner?" "I'm still nervous," David admitted, fixing his tie. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Sarah said firmly. "Robert has done this dozens of times. By tonight, we'll have official papers saying this house belongs to us." Margaret's hands shook as she held her phone. They were so confident, so sure that they were smarter than her. David walked to the closet and pulled out the shoebox with Margaret's deed inside. "Should we tell her we're taking this?" "Are you crazy?" Sarah snapped. "David, we've been over this 100 times. She doesn't need to know anything until it's too late to stop us." They left the house at exactly 9 a.m., with Margaret's deed hidden in Sarah's purse. Margaret watched them drive away, then immediately called the camera system to full recording mode. She had a plan now. A dangerous plan, but it was the only way. At 11 a.m., Margaret's phone rang. It was David. "Hi, Mom," he said, sounding fake cheerful. "Just wanted to let you know that Sarah and I will be out until this evening. We're, looking at apartments." "Apartments?" Margaret played dumb perfectly. "Why would you look at apartments?" You live here with me. Oh, just, for the future. In case we ever want our own place. Liar. They were at Robert's office, stealing her house. That's nice, dear, Margaret said sweetly. Take your time. I'll just be here watching my stories on TV. The moment she hung up, Margaret got busy. She had work to do. First, she called her old friend Betty, who worked at the police station as a secretary. Betty, it's Margaret, she said. I need to ask you about something important. If someone was trying to forge papers to steal a house, who would I talk to? Oh, honey, that's serious business, Betty said. That would be Detective Rodriguez in the fraud department.
Why?
Is everything okay? I'm just asking for a friend, Margaret lied. Can you give me his direct number? Margaret wrote down Detective Rodriguez's phone number, but she wasn't ready to call him yet. She needed more evidence first. At 2 p.m., her phone buzzed with a camera alert. David and Sarah were back, but they looked different. They looked happy, excited, like people who had just committed the perfect crime. Margaret watched them through the kitchen camera as they came inside, talking in whispers. I can't believe how easy that was, David said, pulling papers out of his jacket. Robert had everything ready in 20 minutes. Sarah was practically dancing with joy. Look at these, David. Official property transfer papers. According to the government, we now own a $500,000 house. Margaret felt like she was going to throw up. They had actually done it. They had forged her name and stolen her house. So what happens now? David asked. Now we wait until Monday, Sarah explained. Robert's friend at the property office said the papers will be fully processed by then. Once that happens, we can put the house up for sale. Monday. Margaret had 4 days to stop this before it became impossible to reverse. What about Mom? David asked, looking toward the kitchen where Margaret was supposedly watching TV. We'll tell her tonight, Sarah said with that cruel smile. We'll say we have wonderful news. We found her a beautiful apartment in a senior community. We'll make it sound like we're doing her a favor. A favor. They were going to tell Margaret that stealing her house was a favor. That evening, Margaret sat in her living room, knitting a sweater and humming quietly. She looked like the most innocent old woman in the world. But inside, she was planning their destruction. David and Sarah came in looking guilty and nervous. Mom, David said, sitting next to her on the couch. We have some exciting news to share with you. Oh. Margaret looked up with curious eyes, like she had no idea what was coming. Sarah sat on Margaret's other side, trapping her between them. We've been working very hard to find you the perfect new living situation. New living situation? Margaret asked, tilting her head like a confused grandma. Yes, David said, trying to sound excited. There's this beautiful senior community across town. It has activities and nurses and people your own age to talk to. It sounds lovely, dear, Margaret said slowly. But why would I need that? I have my house. I have you two taking care of me. Sarah and David looked at each other. This was the moment they had been planning for. Well, Mom, Sarah said carefully, the thing is, this house is getting too big for you. It's hard to maintain. The bills are expensive. We think you'd be much happier somewhere smaller and easier to manage. But I love my house, Margaret said in a small, sad voice. I've lived here for 30 years. All my memories are here. I know, Mom, David said, taking her hand. But think about it. You wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or paying bills. Everything would be taken care of for you. Margaret looked back and forth between them with wide, innocent eyes. This senior community, how much does it cost? Don't worry about that, Sarah said quickly. We'll take care of all the financial details. In fact, we've already put down a deposit to reserve you a spot. They had used Margaret's own stolen house money to pay for her prison. When would I have to move? Margaret asked. Well, David said, looking uncomfortable. They have an opening next week. We thought maybe we could start packing your things this weekend. Next week. They wanted to get rid of her in 7 days. Margaret sat quietly for a long moment, like she was thinking very hard. David and Sarah watched her nervously. Finally, Margaret smiled her sweetest grandmotherly smile. If you two think this is best for me, Then I trust you. You've always taken such good care of me." The relief on their faces was disgusting. "Oh, Mom, you're going to love it there," David said, hugging her tight. "We'll visit you all the time," Sarah lied, patting Margaret's arm. "I know you will, dear," Margaret said. "I know you'll do exactly what you deserve." They had no idea what she really meant. That night, after David and Sarah went to bed, Margaret sat in her kitchen with her phone and a notebook. She had been recording everything for 3 days. She had hours of conversations where they confessed to their crimes. She had proof of the forgery. She had proof of the theft. She had proof of their plan to abandon her. But Margaret wasn't going to call the police yet. She had a better idea. Tomorrow, she was going to give David and Sarah a choice. They could confess their crimes and try to make things right, or she could destroy their lives completely. Either way, Margaret was about to get her revenge. And after 35 years of being the sweet, loving mother, Margaret was ready to show them what happened when you betrayed someone who had given you everything. The war was about to begin, and Margaret had all the weapons.
Wow.
Can you believe how strong Margaret is being? If you're cheering for her like I am, smash that like button and hit subscribe because you do not want to miss what happens next. Friday morning came like the calm before a massive storm. Margaret woke up at 5 a.m., even though she usually slept until 7. Her heart was beating fast like a drum before a big battle. Today was the day she would either save her life or lose everything forever. She made coffee with steady hands and sat at her kitchen table with her phone. The camera app showed David and Sarah still sleeping in her bed, in her house, surrounded by her things that they thought they now owned. "Not today," Margaret whispered to herself. "Today, the truth comes out." At 8 a.m., David came downstairs looking happier than Margaret had seen him in months. Why wouldn't he be happy? He thought he had just stolen $500,000 without anyone knowing. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing her cheek. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, dear," Margaret replied, stirring her coffee slowly. "It certainly is going to be a memorable day." David didn't catch the hidden meaning in her words. He was too busy thinking about his stolen house. Sarah came down wearing Margaret's favorite dress, the blue one Margaret had bought for her retirement party. Sarah hadn't even asked to borrow it. She just took it, like she took everything else. "Good morning, Margaret," Sarah said with a fake smile. "David and I were thinking we could start packing some of your things today. You know, to get ready for your move to the senior community." "How thoughtful of you," Margaret said. "But before we do that, I think we need to have a little family meeting." David and Sarah looked at each other. Something in Margaret's voice was different. Stronger. More serious. "A family meeting?" David asked. "About what?" Margaret stood up slowly and walked to the living room. "Please, both of you, sit down. We have some very important things to discuss." David and Sarah followed her, looking confused and slightly worried. They sat together on the couch, the same couch where Margaret had watched them plan to destroy her life. Margaret sat in her favorite chair, the one David had been sitting in when he said it would be too late for her to stop them. She looked at these two people who had lived in her house, eaten her food, taken her money, and stolen her trust. "I want to tell you both a little story," Margaret began, her voice calm and steady. 3 days ago, I had my security camera repaired." David's face went white. Sarah stopped breathing. "The nice technician, Tommy, installed a new app on my phone that lets me see and hear everything that happens in this house, even when I'm not in the room." Sarah's hands started shaking. David looked like he was going to be sick. "Imagine my surprise," Margaret continued, "when I tested the camera Wednesday morning and saw my own son and his wife going through my private papers like thieves in the night." "Mom, I can explain," David started to say. Margaret held up her hand. "I'm not finished talking." The power in her voice made David close his mouth immediately. "I heard you talking about Robert, the crooked lawyer. I heard you planning to forge my signature. I heard you discussing how to trick me into signing fake papers. I heard you talk about selling MY house and putting me in a nursing home with MY own money." Sarah tried to stand up, but Margaret's voice stopped her cold. "Sit down, Sarah. You're going to listen to every word I have to say." Sarah sat back down, tears starting to run down her face. I heard you call me confused, stupid, and paranoid. I heard you say I was just an obstacle to your happiness. I heard you laugh about how easy it would be to fool a dumb old woman. David was crying now too. Mom, please, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. Quiet. Margaret's voice was louder than it had been in years. You stole my house deed. You forged my signature. You committed fraud. You planned to abandon me after I gave you everything I had. Margaret stood up and walked to her bookshelf. Behind her photo albums, she pulled out a thick folder. This folder contains printed copies of every conversation you've had in this house for the past 3 days. Every criminal plan. Every lie you told me. Every cruel thing you said about the woman who raised you. She opened the folder and pulled out pages and pages of typed conversations. Here's you discussing the $25,000 you paid Robert for the forgery. Here's you planning to sell my house for $400,000 profit. Here's you laughing about how I would never figure out what you did. David fell to his knees. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. It was all Sarah's idea. Don't you dare. Sarah screamed, jumping up from the couch. David, you were just as eager as I was. You wanted this house just as much. Margaret watched them turn on each other, just like criminals always do when they get caught. Both of you need to stop talking and listen carefully, Margaret said. I'm going to give you one choice. Just one. They both looked at her with desperate, frightened eyes. Choice number 1. You call Robert right now in front of me and tell him to destroy those fake papers. You go to the property office and confess what you did. You move out of my house today and never come back. What's choice number 2? Sarah asked in a tiny voice. Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who held all the power. Choice number 2. I call Detective Rodriguez at the police station. I give him all this evidence. I press charges for fraud, forgery, theft, and elder abuse. You both go to prison for 5 to 10 years. The room went completely silent except for the sound of David and Sarah crying. You have exactly 5 minutes to decide, Margaret said, looking at her watch. Choose wisely. This is the only chance you'll ever get. David looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at David. They both looked at Margaret, the woman they had thought was just a helpless old lady they could trick and abandon. But Margaret wasn't helpless anymore. She had become something much more dangerous. She had become a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. For minutes and 30 seconds, Margaret said calmly. The clock was ticking. The trap was set. And David and Sarah were about to learn that the sweet grandmother they thought they knew had just become their judge, jury, and possibly their destroyer. Margaret sat back in her chair and waited. After 35 years of giving her son everything, she was about to find out if there was any love left in his heart, or if she was going to have to destroy the family she had spent her whole life building. Either way, Margaret was ready. The war had officially begun. 3 minutes, Margaret said, her voice as steady as a rock. David and Sarah sat frozen on the couch, tears streaming down their faces. They kept looking at each other, then at Margaret, then at the folder of evidence that could destroy their lives forever. Sarah, David whispered, what do we do? I don't know. Sarah whispered back, this is all your fault. You said she would never find out. My fault. David's voice got louder. You're the one who found Robert. You're the one who planned everything. Margaret watched them fall apart, just like she knew they would. Criminals always turned on each other when they got caught. 2 minutes, Margaret announced. Sarah suddenly jumped up from the couch. You know what? I'm not going to be bullied by some old woman. Margaret, you can't prove anything. Those recordings could be fake. Margaret smiled calmly and picked up her phone. Hello, Detective Rodriguez? This is Margaret Wilson. I have evidence of fraud and elder abuse that I need to report immediately. Wait, David screamed, lunging for the phone. Mom, please don't. Margaret pulled the phone away and hung up. That was just a test, David. But Detective Rodriguez is expecting my call. I spoke to him yesterday. Sarah's face went completely white. You already talked to the police? I talked to everyone I needed to talk to, Margaret said. My lawyer, my bank, the property office, and yes, the police. Did you really think I would discover your plan and just sit here crying about it? David collapsed back onto the couch, putting his head in his hands. Mom, I am so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen. I love you so much. If you love me, Margaret said, then you'll make the right choice. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Sarah was pacing now like a trapped animal. This is ridiculous. Margaret, we're your family. You can't send your own son to prison. My son wouldn't steal from me, Margaret replied coldly. My son wouldn't forge my name. My son wouldn't plan to abandon me in a nursing home. I don't know who you people are, but you're not my family anymore. Those words hit David like a punch to the stomach. He looked up at his mother with broken eyes. Mom, please. I'll do anything to fix this. Anything. 1 minute, Margaret said. David suddenly stood up and grabbed Sarah's arm. We have to choose option 1. We have to call Robert and confess everything. Are you insane? Sarah yanked her arm away. If we confess, we'll still get in trouble. And we'll lose the house. We never had the house, David shouted. It was never ours. We stole it. 30 seconds, Margaret said. Sarah looked at Margaret with pure hatred in her eyes. You know what, you old witch? Keep your stupid house. We don't need you or your money. David can find a real job, and we'll build our own life. David stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Sarah, how can you talk to my mother like that? Because your mother is a selfish old woman who wants to keep us poor and dependent on her forever. Sarah screamed. 10 seconds, Margaret said. David looked at Sarah, then at his mother. In that moment, he had to choose between the woman he married and the woman who raised him. I choose option 1, Mom, David said quietly. I'll call Robert right now. David, no. Sarah screamed. But David was already pulling out his phone. With shaking hands, he dialed Robert's number. Robert? It's David. We need to destroy those papers. Yes, all of them. Because it was wrong, and I can't live with what we did. I don't care about the money we already paid you. Just destroy everything. Margaret listened to David confess everything to the crooked lawyer. She watched her son try to undo the terrible thing he had done. When David hung up, he looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. He's going to destroy the fake papers today. And he's going to call his contact at the property office to make sure nothing gets processed. Good, Margaret said. Now call the property office yourself and confess what you tried to do. David made the second phone call, admitting to the government workers that he had tried to commit fraud. Margaret listened to every word. When he finished, David fell to his knees in front of his mother's chair. Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was stupid and greedy, and I almost destroyed everything. Margaret looked down at her son, this man she had raised with so much love. David, you broke my heart. You made me feel scared and alone in my own home. You planned to steal everything I worked for. I know, David sobbed. I know, and I hate myself for it. But, Margaret continued, you made the right choice in the end. You chose to confess instead of letting me destroy you. Sarah was standing by the door with her suitcases. I'm leaving, David. I'm not staying with someone who's too weak to fight for what he wants. David looked at his wife, this woman who had turned him into a criminal. Then leave, Sarah. I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and evil. Sarah stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. Margaret and David sat in silence for a long moment. What happens now, Mom? David asked. Margaret was quiet for a while, thinking. Now you move out of my house and find your own place. You get a real job. You pay me back every penny you gave to Robert. Yes, ma'am. And David, Margaret's voice got softer. If you can prove to me over time that you're truly sorry, that you've changed, maybe someday we can rebuild our relationship. But it will take years to earn back my trust. David nodded, tears still streaming down his face. I understand. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. 3 months later, Margaret was sitting in her kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. Her house was quiet and peaceful again. David had moved into a small apartment across town and gotten a job at a construction company. Every Friday, he sent Margaret a check for $200, part of paying back the $25,000 they had given to Robert. He also sent her letters every week, telling her about his job, apologizing again, and asking how she was doing. He never asked to visit. He was waiting for her to invite him. Sarah had moved to another city and married a different man within 2 months. Margaret heard she was trying the same tricks on her new husband's elderly father. Margaret picked up her phone and opened the camera app. All the cameras were still working perfectly, but now she used them just to feel safe, not to spy on criminals living in her own home. Detective Rodriguez had called several times to congratulate Margaret on her bravery. The police department was now using her story to teach other elderly people how to protect themselves from family fraud. As Margaret finished her coffee, she thought about everything that had happened. She had lost her son's wife, and her relationship with David was still broken. But she had saved her house, her money, and most importantly, her dignity. Margaret was 68 years old, and she had just learned that she was stronger, smarter, and braver than she had ever imagined. Sometimes the people you love the most will hurt you the worst. But if you're smart, if you're prepared, and if you refuse to be a victim, you can fight back and win. Margaret had won the war for her own life. And that was worth more than any house could ever be.
Wow.
What an incredible ending. Margaret didn't just save her house. She saved her dignity and showed the world that elderly people are not easy targets. If this story gave you chills and made you want to cheer for Margaret, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories like this one. I want to know, are you proud of Margaret for how she handled this? And what do you think about David's choice to confess? Was he a good son who made a terrible mistake, or was he just as bad as Sarah? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Also, tell me where you're watching from and whether you've ever heard of situations like this happening in real life. Margaret's story is fictional, but these types of family frauds happen every day around the world. Please share this story with your friends and family, especially if you know elderly people who might be vulnerable. We all need to watch out for each other and make sure nobody gets taken advantage of like Margaret almost was. Thank you for following Margaret's incredible journey with me. Remember, you're never too old to fight for what's yours, and you're never too weak to stand up to people who want to hurt you. Hit that subscribe button for more stories that will inspire you to be brave like Margaret.